And I'll give you the go-ahead. All right, please begin.
Welcome, everyone. My name is John Berkowitz. I live in Northampton. I'm a member of Massachusetts Peace Action's Peace in Ukraine campaign. And I'm really glad you're all here. While we're waiting and filling the virtual room up with more people, I will just introduce our webinar speaker and give a little bit of information, and then she will take it from there in about 6 or 8 minutes. I will just say that Dr. Marta Havryshko of Ukraine, I heard for the first time back in February an interview that she did on a program called Useful Idiots to journalists Aaron Maté and Katie Halper. It was excellent. I recommend everybody look that up, Useful Idiots. And it was so good. I wanted to get her on one of our webinars, and here she is. So here is my introduction. Dr. Marta Havryshko of Ukraine is a visiting assistant professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies and gender and sexual violence towards women at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. She also specializes in the role of Ukrainian ultra-nationalists, a small minority who have gained disproportionate military and political power. She has received death threats for her critical views on the far right, including neo-Nazis, and on the increasingly undemocratic and unpopular policies of President Zelensky. She's let me know also that she has lost several relatives and close friends who fought in this war. It's not over. I'm just going to add, while we're still letting a few more people in, that she's going to address some of the following issues. And I'm going to say the first bullet point is she's addressing corruption and personal enrichment at the highest levels of the Ukrainian government. Second bullet point, bribery, enabling wealthier men to leave the country and avoid military conscription. Third bullet, Zelensky's growing unpopularity due to his conscription policies and repression of opposition political parties, repression of the Russian Orthodox churches, and repression of independent media outlets. Another aspect of what she'll be addressing is the long history of Ukrainian ultra-nationalists. Their founding by Stepan Bandera, if I pronounced that right, and support for the Nazis during World War II, including the murder of an estimated 100,000 Jews, Poles, and other people. Fighting the Soviets, the ultra-nationalists, then fighting the Soviets after the war and receiving major support from the US, CIA to undermine Soviet control of Ukraine. And they're being welcomed, those ultra-nationalists, as exiles in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. In 2024, in the Ukrainian city of Lviv, or is it Lvov, maybe both, neo-Nazi Ukrainians openly hosted an international conference of far-right proponents of racism and anti-Semitism. And lastly, she'll be addressing the long-standing division in Ukraine between those who want to side with the West and those who want to remain close with Russia for linguistic, cultural, religious, economic, and political reasons. This division came to a head during the Maidan protests of 2014, the unconstitutional ousting of the elected government, and the war in eastern Ukraine for the last 11 years that led, in part, to the Russian invasion of 2022. So with that, welcome everyone again, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Marta Havryshko.
Thank you so much, John, for your kind introduction. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you. And let me share my screen. I prepared some presentation just to give you a taste about these radical far rights in Ukraine who have enormous influence today. So, do you see my presentation?
I do.
Yes, great. So today I will talk primarily, my focus will be, this presentation will be about far right and their influence on Ukraine politics and their role in modern Ukraine. But also, I'm happy to address other issues that John kindly described, because a lot of those issues are basically connected to this topic. So, who are the far right in Ukraine? First of all, those who trace Ukraine politics after so-called Maidan Revolution or Revolution of Dignity from 2013 to 2014, and we in US primarily know about this through the involvement of US, Victoria Nuland, so many discussion about, interference of US in these events. So those who know about this event when so-called pro-Russian President Yanukovych escaped to Russia after, massacre on Maidan. It's a square, the biggest square in the capital of Ukraine, and basically the culmination of these protests and this so-called revolution of dignity were massacre of more than 100 civilian people, including one of my colleagues who was a historian back then from my native city of Lviv in Western Ukraine. But it is believed, and Ivan Kachinovsky addressed this perfectly in his book, it is believed that some part of responsibility for this massacre and for the violence in Maidan and during this revolution lies on those members of far-right groups, like, for example, Right Sector or Pravый Sector, and other like Azov movement, and for example Karpatska Sich was formed later, but they were connected to Right Sector. So many far-right organizations took part in this Maidan revolution. Maidan revolution was represented by, numerous people, which represented numerous different political groups. There were queer people there, feminists, liberals, conservatives, nationalists, but these far right were well prepared and well trained because they were a part of their paramilitary organizations, and they were willing and ready to use violence. And basically, they made a decisive that they had a decisive role in this revolution. And the government was overthrown, and basically the new election then happened, and Ukraine started to move east westward. But now, especially after 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine after the start of so-called big war, many of those organizations, they were not dissolved, but they entered the military of Ukraine, armed forces of Ukraine, National Guard of Ukraine, as entire units with their structures, with their hierarchies, with their values, and with their leaders. And now, for example, one of the biggest far-right movement in Ukraine, Azov movement, is represented at least by three, and now it's even more, at least by three military units. I mean, 12th Azov Brigade in National Guard as a part of National Guard, the 3rd Separate Azov Brigade as a member of Ukraine Armed Forces, and as a Kraken led by military intelligence, GUR. And nowadays, please pay attention that they started as, as brigade, which means that their number was approximately, 4,000-5,000 people. But now both Azov Brigade as a part of National Guard and the 3rd Azov Brigade became a corps. So now each of these each of these military units will have at least 20,000 people, and they preserve their ideology that I will describe later. The right sector is another far-right organization, and Carpathian Siege, for example, as you see, they also are part of Ukraine as a separate unit. It's a part of Ukraine armed forces, and recently it also absorbed the members of neo-Nazi German volunteer corps. And I recommend you to follow their Telegram channel, where they celebrate Hitler's birthday, where they celebrate, Nazi Holocaust, make racist jokes, Holocaust jokes. So they are openly neo-Nazi, they are openly white supremacists, and they are part nowadays, officially part of Ukraine armed forces. What is the basic ideology? I put this picture from the Arsenal Book Forum in Kyiv that was held on this weekend in Kyiv. And as you see, Zelensky president, and near him, it's a head of publishing house that published this book. As you see, this symbol resembles Volksangel, which is Nazi symbol, and the entire book is an anthology of Ukrainian nationalism. So basically, it includes writings of most nationalistic Ukrainian writers, and almost all of them basically supported the idea that Jews are enemies of Ukrainian nation and they should be exterminated. Some of them were members of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground, and they organized anti-Jewish pogroms in 1941. So basically, all these arguments that, Ukraine has a Jewish president, so Ukraine don't have a Nazi problem, it's ridiculous, because Zelensky himself, in his photo, as you see, he promotes Ukraine ideology, which was racist, which was very controversial. And these members of this Ukrainian nationalists on the ground, organization of Ukrainian nationalists and its military wing, Ukraine Insurgent Army, they are responsible for tens of thousands of deaths of civilians, including children, including elderly people, Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, and other people. So what are the main points of the ideology of far right nowadays in Ukraine? Ultra-nationalism, of course. And they are talking about Ukrainian nation, and in most cases they mean basically ethnic nationalism. So they are open about deprivation of civil rights for different minority groups. Also anti-Russia. This is one of the main points. And this anti-Russia I put in quoting marks. It means basically that Russia poses existential threat for Ukrainian nation and for Ukraine's sovereignty. For obvious reason, of course, because because of the annexation of Crimea in 2014, because the interference in war in Donbass, and now after February 2022, of course, we observe how Russia basically destroys infrastructure in Ukraine. And the Russian military commit a lot of crimes. Even today, it was another missile strike at the city center in Sumy region, and 4 people were killed, and at least 25 were wounded, and among them 3 children nowadays in critical condition. So basically, Russians said that they targeted security service building, but of course, this security service building is located in the city center. So basically, you can't avoid civilian casualties. So this is a strategy of Russia. So anti-Russia in all possible ways. Then militarism. They're obsessed with militarism. They started training long before the war because they prepared for war with Russia. So they have this cult of war. They have cult of fallen heroes, and of course, cult of leader. Of course, they are not democratic. They want to build, authoritarian state with great leader who will be, charismatic, who will be leader of the nation. And of course, as any other far right in Europe and in US, we observe this alt movement. We observe this Atomwaffen division, for example, in US, and other Oath Keepers, Proud Boys. Many of them proponents of anti-immigration rhetoric, like many nowadays conservative also politicians, and we have far right on the rise in many countries, including US, Islamophobia. They have very strong white supremacism, and they obsess with this idea of renewal of this, white Europe. Then anti-Semitism, and they are heavily involved in Holocaust revisionism. And actually, I must say that Jewishness of Zelensky played a huge role here because they believe, and the Jewishness of his advisor, main advisor, I mean Andriy Yermak, who is the head of the office of the president, and now he is in US today, and he also has a Jewish background. That's why many insinuations, many speculations about this, how they sell Ukraine, how they want to erase Ukraine, how they want to replace Ukrainians with Jewish people, other people, who knows, So they spread this conspiracy theories, of course, about cultural Marxism, source plots, Rothschilds and all this stuff. We know all these things perfectly well. Then, of course, a strong part of their ideology concerns anti-genderism, anti-feminism, homophobia. They organize a lot of events against LGBTQ plus community. And they basically, if you analyze their rhetoric, it's very similar to the rhetoric of Nazis and Himmler himself. I teach about persecution of LGBT people, queer people, gay people, their persecution, concentration camp, their sterilization. And when we analyze with my student this rhetoric, so nowadays rhetoric of Ukraine far right, like many other far right in the post-Soviet space and even in Europe nowadays, is very similar regarding first of all, gay people. And of course, it has a lot to do with fragile masculinity and about, crisis of masculinity that we observe in many, many countries. That's why those people, populism, they propose easy solutions for very difficult problems. We observe this phenomenon in so many countries. But also, I want to take a note that they also have imperialism. For example, Azov movement. Here you see another book about ideology. Author is Alexei Rein's Consul, and he's often drawing this map of Ukraine, and as you see, is very different from the actual map of Ukraine even before occupation of Crimea. And this map includes lands of Poland, Hungary, Romania, Belarus, and of course, many lands of Russia. And many members of these, many ideologies of this Azov movement, for example, they are very open about, imperialism that Ukrainians need in order to not even to survive, but in order to build a greater Ukraine, they should retake all those territories. That's why I'm very, it's very strange for me when some people in Poland, for example, are welcoming members of these organizations on their soil. Well, they openly promote, their imperialism. Very important role in the ideology of far right in Ukraine is allusions to the experience of the Second World War. But those allusions actually transform into open a celebration of Nazi politics. So basically, they tend to portray Nazis as lesser evil in comparison to Stalin's Russia and to Bolsheviks. And they celebrate Nazi collaborators. Many of them were members of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground. They believe that Hitler will basically support the idea of Ukraine independence. It didn't happen, as we know, but many members of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground, they were members of auxiliary police, of different military units, and they actively participated in the Holocaust, including shootings. It wasn't only, they were not only guards in the concentration camps. They were not only involved in convoying Jews to killing places. And we know that Holocaust in Eastern Ukraine, especially in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, and especially in Eastern Ukraine, it's the so-called Holocaust by bullets. Most of Ukrainian Jews, they died not in concentration camps, not in Auschwitz, but near their homes from bullets. And in these shootings were involved those brave soldiers who are now perceived and celebrated as freedom fighters. So they make, different exhibition. For example, this exhibition was opened in one of the biggest museum and you see this, charismatic man who is neo-Nazi. His body is covered with swastika. He has a big tattoo. He is Russian, actually citizen, Kolovrat, Kozhemyakin. He escaped from Russia from persecution. He was a racist, neo-Nazi, anti-Semite there, and he joined Azov, and now he's a commander in this Azov Serdasov brigade. And he participated, as you know, in this photo exhibition. And I was so, struck when this exhibition was opened, and, many politicians, many journalists, many public figures, even historians participated in this. But nobody actually objected the fact that they compared themselves with the members of division Waffen-SS Galicia that participated in anti-Jewish violence, anti-Polish violence, anti-partisan actions in former Yugoslavia during the Second World War. And many of those members were accepted then to Canada, and some of them live happy life and even got standing ovation, as we remember, as Hunka got in Canadian Parliament. He was a veteran of SS Division Galicia. So this revisionism of the World War II is connected to minimizing the role of Ouna Dupam and Ukrainian nationalists in war crimes against Poles and their participation in the Holocaust. And of course, for them, the Soviet liberation of Ukrainian lands in 1944 wasn't liberation, it was another occupation. And they tend to portray the entire period until 1991 to the dissolution of the Soviet Union as a period of occupation, repression, and deprivation of liberty. So only in black colors. As you see, for example, here is Andrei Beletsky on the back. It's a war ceremony in one of the Azov brigade, the Third Azov brigade. And as you see, the guy has a patch. 3 grenades is modified patch of Waffen-SS division, one of the Waffen-SS division. There are also many military men. They have clothing brands, and as you see, many of those brands, they celebrate Barbarossa campaign, meaning German attack on Soviet Union, and they celebrate many commanders of Wehrmacht and even Waffen-SS openly, despite the fact that Ukraine criminalized promotion of Nazi regime, and those who violate this law can face punishment up to 5 years in prison. But in Ukraine, nobody is put under this law in prison. Only those who display Soviet symbols are put in prison, and real sentence are given to them, especially for those who post several times on their social media. For example, Vedmedi military unit, it's an official unit in Ukrainian armed forces, and they use officially on their flag, they use SS balls, as you see, and they use SS motto, "My honor is loyalty." And nobody see a problem with this, This is Ukraine, Nobody see a problem there nowadays. And for example, here, they made a direct comparison between them, some military units like Karpatska Sich, is a far-right unit, nationalist unit, and the members of Ukrainian Insurgent Army. So this picture on the above was taken in somewhere, in Western Ukraine, where they were active in 1940s, and this picture was taken in this spring 2025. So as you see, that they have this idea that we continue the struggle against Russia. But back then it was a Bolshevik Russia, it was communist Russia led by Judeo-Bolsheviks. Yes, so they are proponents of this Judeo-Bolshevism, Bolshevik myth, this anti-Semitic trope that justified, that helped Nazis justify the Holocaust. And now they still are fighting Russia, but the face of Russia is Putin and his team. And it's very important to understand how far right actually are spreading their ideology. And of course, their target audience, main target audience is the youth. They work with young people. How they work with young people? Ukraine state allowed them to go to the schools and perform so-called lessons of courage. So they go with their, Nazi tattoos, with their hate symbols, and they teach young people how to die on the battlefield for their country, how this death for motherland is glorious and is the sweetest death that possible. Then they often organize these free Azov, for example, advocacy campaign for prisoners of wars, because we know that in Russian captivity there are thousands of Ukrainians, both civilians and military men. Then they organize military and medical training for youth, and they explain parents, we are in the war, and this war will continue, dozens of years or even hundreds of years, so we should prepare your children for this war. Then they organize public discussions, book presentations, lectures, and they often, talk about, for example, Weimar Republic, and for example, how, how Nazis basically got the power, how they use force, how they use political violence. So basically, for them, it's very instrumental knowledge. Then, of course, they organize sport competitions. They promote this, healthy body, these, sports, and mixed martial arts are very important for them. Of course, as I told you, they engage in different anti-LGBT plus advocacy, how they call it. So basically, in these hate events, and often they use violence and violence threat attacks on LGBT plus people community and their advocates. Also music, they call it National Socialist black metal music. And can you imagine, one of the most popular band in Ukraine has the name Hitler's Hammer, and almost all members of this band are officers in Ukraine armed forces, and they were allowed openly to organize their music festival in Kyiv, where about 700 people attended, and they made the pictures and disseminated, and on those pictures they are making Nazi salute, or how they call it, mask salute, in quoting marks. Yes, so they are doing this Zig Heil. They are singing anti-Semitic songs about Kabbalah children and ovens for Kabbalah children. But nobody see a problem with this nowadays. Why? Because they are freedom fighters, they are national heroes. And of course, they have their own clothing brands, like this guy, as you see, Auschwitz University. So basically, he openly mocks the Holocaust survivors and mocks the entire memory about the Nazi genocide of Jewish people. And they organize, they often work with youth. As you see here, Centurion is most important and the biggest youth organization nowadays in Ukraine. It has thousands of people in different Ukrainian cities, and nowadays even in Austria and Germany. And they work with youth, they promote their ideology, white supremacy, and all the stuff that I mentioned earlier. Centuria, Sturm, Ukraine Unity in Blood, which is very anti-Semitic. They distribute very anti-Semitic leaflets. For example, during Hanukkah time, during Hanukkah, they disseminated leaflets which alludes to pogroms in Ukraine made by Khmelnytsky and during Kolivshina. Then Ukraine Galician youth, they also use very hate symbols and very supremacist rhetoric. At the beginning of our presentation of our event, John mentioned this conference, Nation Europe, Nation Europa, in Lviv in August. It was the Day of Independence. Why it's important. Can you imagine that in war-torn country, in one of the biggest city in Ukraine, which is Lviv, and Lviv positioned itself as a cultural capital of Ukraine, this kind of conference is organized. Who are participants of this conference? It's a German neo-Nazi Dritte Weg. It's an Italian fascist organization Casa Pound. It's a Polish Trzecia Droga. It's Albanian nationalists. It's a members of different German volunteer corps, which is neo-Nazi, Russian volunteer corps, whose head, White Rex Nikitin, was expelled from Germany, and now he's subjected to Schengen ban because of his extremist activity, because he's white supremacist, and he openly spread this ideology, and he celebrates Hitler's birthday. And you see all these guys here in Ukraine, and almost those Ukraine members, they are officers in Ukraine army. So can you imagine that they just, leave the front line easily and without, without supervision of Ukraine security service or military intelligence, will participate in the conference where the most notorious neo-Nazis will take part. So I had a lot of questions to the security service when I learned about this conference, but you will never learn about this event from mainstream media, both Ukraine and Western media, because they are trying to hide this information. And their idea is, please don't, don't echo Russian propaganda. It's not true. But they're boasting about this conference. They publish different materials of this conference. Why they organize this networking? Because Ukraine experienced the lack of manpower. As you know, hundreds of thousands of people nowadays are dead or heavily wounded. So basically, they can't go to the front line. And they are trying to allure neo-Nazis from different territories, including U.S. One of the men who is sending me the death threats is an American neo-Nazi. And nowadays I'm trying, to hold him accountable for what he is doing. But he is a fighter in one of this unit. So can you imagine they are trying, and we know that neo-Nazis and members of these far-right groups, they are trying to gain military experience, military training. And I often ask, public in the West, can you imagine that all those guys will return to their respective home countries and will involve in the activities that they love to do, basically violence, and many of those people will have PTSD, and many of those people will experience some sort of they will want to revenge, because any peace agreement and peace settlement will be not very good for them. So I mentioned the responsibility of media, both Ukraine and Western media. For example, Washington Post made this publication about new recruiting campaign of one of these far-right units, the Third Assault Brigade. As you see, it's very sexualized, basically is very misogynist, and the main idea to sell the sex to young boy, to allure them to the war, to sell the war and death as an attractive adventure, as a romantic adventure. And can you imagine, this article never mentioned even, the voices of female combatants. And nowadays in Ukraine armed forces, we have 70,000 of Ukrainian women are serving, and many of them experience sexual violence and sexual harassment. But nobody asked them while preparing this article, what are they thinking about this kind of promotion? It's like, in US Army, it was in 50s, 60s, this pin-up, pictures, yeah? But Ukraine Army still openly use very sexist recruiting campaigns, and nobody can challenge them in Ukraine nowadays. So as you see, Washington Post, they published this article with this, this elite brigade, and they, this brigade is involved in several misogynist scandals. They talked about their own female combatants as about, prostitutes, as about military prostitutes. They made this, very sexist, very dirty rape jokes openly during, their entertainment campaigns, public events. But this article never mentioned this because, they are not interested in this kind of discussion. So basically, many political elites after 2022, they started to legitimize and normalize far-right in Ukraine. They started to call them just patriots or just nationalists or de-radicalized parties or depoliticized parties because they entered military. But their entrance of the military means that they received more state resources, more diplomatic coverage, more financial support, and more legitimacy, not less. And I'm often talked about this and I'm often criticized about this because many people are so threatened in Ukraine by possible Russian occupation that they are ready, even to send, devil to the front line just to avoid military service. And many experts also in Ukraine nowadays engage in whitewashing this organization. They prefer to keep silence about their ideology, about their extreme ideas, about their sexism and homophobia, including about their white supremacists. But not only silent, they whitewash them and they participate in campaigns against scholars like me, who are trying to call out them and to describe the threats from those far right who are well trained, who receive NATO training, who receive the best NATO weapon, and who are very well motivated. And we saw how they can make a difference during Maidan Revolution in 1914. And nowadays, they are growing in number. Nowadays, we have tens of thousands of those people who are ready to do what their leader is asking. So many academic institutions and even human rights organizations in Ukraine, and not even in Ukraine, we see that some neo-Nazis from Azov are openly celebrated and invited to, Stanford University here in US, to other university. They receive standing ovations. The ovations. They are invited to Pentagon. And we remember that Azov, for example, was subjected to weapon ban imposed by US Congress in 2018. Why? Because of its extremist ideology, because also of involvement in war crimes in Donbass, and because of the fact that many neo-Nazis from US got training there and participated in training in Azov on the territory of Ukraine and participated in war. So basically, because of that, they pose a threat not only for Ukraine but for their domestic countries. So basically, they could be engaged in international terrorism. But because of the political decision from the White House, this ban was lifted in 2024. And many organizations, for example, Stanford University, they erased the Azov from its list of military organization, extremist military organizations. Anti-Defamation League completely changed its rhetoric and didn't. Now they avoid calling them, neo-Nazis and call out their problematic ideology. They keep silence or even involved in whitewashing them. That's why it's very problematic when those political elites are engaging in this whitewashing. So, and the last point that I want to make, how far right are the threats not only for Ukraine democracy and human rights in Ukraine, but also they are threat to peace negotiations and to the peace process, because they have very extreme demands and very maximalist agenda. We saw it's already We remember, I must confess, I voted for Zelensky. Why? Because he promised peace in Ukraine. He promised settle, all this problem with Donbass, and we remember this peace agreement and peace process, Minsk process. But in 2019, after he became a president and he went to Zolote in Donbass region in Lugansk Oblast, he had an open conflict with military guys there, and many of them, these vocal military men, were members of Azov unit, meaning they belong to this ultra-nationalist organization. And they started to threaten him openly on the camera. They started to threaten him and push their agenda. And it was the time when he expressed his, very famous or rather infamous slogan, "I'm not a sucker, I'm the president." Yeah. But what happened next after that? The leader of Azov movement, Andriy Beletsky, who was a white supremacist, open white supremacist, his quotes about, white race and white Europe and white children is, you can easily find this quote. He recorded a video and he started openly threatening Zelensky. And he said him, today we have a few dozens of people, but tomorrow we will bring tens of thousands there. So we will not give up those territories, we will fight. That's why, in the light of all this, I believe that far right in Ukraine, and because of the prestige of this far right, because in the past years, they received this, enormous support from the state, enormous media coverage. They are portrayed as heroes, not as, football hooligans, not as skinheads, not as, anti-Semites. No, they are portrayed as true patriots who are willing to sacrifice their life for the motherland. That's why they have a credit. They have such a big credibility in Ukrainian society, you can't even imagine. And nowadays, for example, you remember on Sunday, there was sabotage attack on Russia air bases in several cities in Russia, in several places, and it was one of the most successful operations, as some experts say. And I must say that many leaders of far-right units in Ukraine are very inspired by this organization, and they started to push this agenda that Ukraine can militarily defeat Russia. So we should keep this violent force mobilization, we should keep closed borders, and we should escalate. So basically, their message is we should fight, fight, fight. Many of them are ready to die, and they want other to die. And nobody asks other people in Ukraine, are they willing to sacrifice their life for the country that is far from their image of democratic, inclusive, and safe country? Because Ukraine today is a very ethno-nationalistic state when Russian-speaking people are second-class citizens, when Russian language is persecuted, when Orthodox Church, Russian Orthodox Church is persecuted, when many politicians, members of oppositions, many bloggers, many journalists are repressed. Some of them are in jail. Some of them are sanctioned by their own government without court decision, without due process, but by decision of Zelensky and his inner circle. So many people nowadays don't understand for what many of those people should die and should, should sacrifice their life. That's why Ukraine nowadays still in very difficult position, and I hope that that Ukraine received this, a chance to obtain fair peace. Of course, the concept of fair peace and just peace is very is not simple, yeah, and we don't know how to reach this just peace. But I believe that this, this war should end, because many people sacrifice so much, and many people are already dead. Yeah, thank you so much, and I am willing to respond to your questions if you have some.
Thank you so much, Professor Havryshko. That was a presentation with expertise, with passion, and I will say courage when you're talking about death threats and people challenging your views. But before we get to the Q&A, I want to turn to Paul Shannon to make an announcement about our work, the campaign's work, and an invitation to get involved. Paul.
Well, that was quite a presentation, and of course, these days we're focused on whether or not the war will end. There's been incredible escalation with these very brilliant but dangerous attacks on the Russian military bases, which cross the Russian red lines. If Russia follows out its nuclear policy that is now public, we would be at nuclear war by that policy. And all we can do is hope that cooler heads will prevail, and that somehow this new crisis will pass, as have others in the past. Very few people are aware of the dangers that this new escalation of this attack on on Russian strategic bombers, how dangerous that is. That never happened in the Cold War. It's never happened before between nuclear powers, and this is just so very dangerous. So right now we need peace. We need a negotiated settlement, as complicated as that process is. The different sides have to continue to meet, have to continue to negotiate. There has to be a diplomatic solution to this that not only includes Ukraine, but then our effort here at Mass Peace Action is not only to promote a diplomatic solution in Ukraine, but support a new security system in Europe in which all European countries are covered by the notion of common security, and as opposed to this division that exists in Europe right now, and that is getting much, much worse, and which is so dangerous, not just to the countries involved, but to the whole world. So given that, I would just ask you if you believe that a diplomatic solution is absolutely essential, that you get involved with us. I don't know, maybe if I can put in the chat a link.
I'll take care of Paul.
Oh, you can take care of that, Brian? That'd be great. Okay, good. Let me just show you what this looks like. Do I have the opportunity to share, Brian?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go. This is what the form looks like, where you can sign up. Brian is putting the link in the chat so that you can bring this form up. And if you agree with what our campaign is about, we hope you will sign up so we can stay in touch with you, give you the latest information, and ask you to take actions that will be in conformity with this statement before you right now. So please sign up. We'll stay in touch. We have to work through this together. We have to figure out this complicated situation together before it gets even more dangerous than it is right now. And now Brian is just going to ask everyone to take an action not related to Ukraine, but related to this other incredible crisis in front of us now, the starvation in Gaza. Brian, you want to explain that?
Sure, absolutely. And you can actually send a message as well to your members of Congress if you live here in the United States to urge them to support a negotiated end to the war in Ukraine and not more destruction. But as Paul alluded, we also know that there is another great devastation going on in the world every day that we're seeing, and that is the destruction and starvation of Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, with also U.S. tax dollars being perpetrated by the government of Israel. So there is a new piece of legislation being introduced in the House. I understand it's being introduced by the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and has a great deal of support. There should be over 70 original co-sponsors. So if you would like to send a message to your member of the House of Representatives if you're here in the United States and urge them to sign on and publicly oppose the starvation and the blocking of aid that is being prevented from getting into Gaza. And let me remind you, that is aid paid for by your tax dollars, some of it, which according to U.S. law should end weapons to a government that is blocking that. So in complete contravention of U.S. law. If you support ending that, please click on that link I just put in the chat and send a message to your member of the House telling them to co-sponsor this resolution that's being introduced. Thank you. And just to let you know, we will send out all of these links in a follow-up email along with the recording, so you can share them with your friends and make that noise that we're making even louder.
Thanks so much, Brian. I hope that Dr. Havryshko has caught her breath after that presentation. And now we're going to move to the Q&A. But I want to say two things. You might be worried. I'm sure we have so many questions and comments to make about what she presented and other aspects of the war. And it's already 9 minutes before 8. And quite often our webinars end at 8 o'clock. The speaker often has other plans, needs. I'm happy to say Professor Havryshko has agreed to be here at least till 8:15, perhaps even 8:30, if the questions keep coming. So we have the space. Having said that, I want to encourage people, and I'm actually going to keep people to a 45-second question or comment. And if it's 45 seconds, I'm going to go ding, thank you, and just finish your sentence and stop, because we want to get to as many voices as possible in the time we've got. So please observe that limit and respect everyone else's voices. And Brian and Paul, I'm going to ask you, I actually can only see one screen at a time, 24. If I miss a hand, please let me know. Somebody's been waiting, okay?
Absolutely.
So with that 45-second limit, I am seeing, at least on my screen, one hand, and that be, oh, now I see two. We'll start with Jeffrey Barkdall. 45 seconds.
I got 4, so I'm going to speak real fast. Okay. Did you know Karl Marx, the original person of communism, was pro-democracy? And do you think, for second question, do you think that high-ranking officers would excuse me to say this, assassinate Putin before he launches the nuclear strike? I'm sorry to say that, but and I'm even learning the history. I'm even learning the war to find out what's causing all the root cause. So why can't, if the Nazis are the root cause of this war, why can't we make a deal with the Russians so we can end this war by getting rid of them, if that's the cause? And also for everyone, I'm making music so
Ding, thank
I can
you. Finish up. Thanks, Jeffrey.
make peace.
Thank you.
Make peace.
Dr. Havryshko, Professor, would you like to respond?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I understood correctly, but I was struck with the last part of the question about, peace with Russia. Many people ask me, you are the one people, it's like, US will have the war with Canada, how can it possible, But but the problem is that if you hear Putin, and if you read what he is saying about Ukraine, he basically denies Ukraine agency, and he wants Ukraine to be a part of a Russian state. He wants to subjugate Ukraine, and it's one of the major reasons of this war. And it's like, I compare it often with the domestic violence when often it's a man. Yeah, let's recognize this. Yeah, let's admit this. Man is not willing to let his wife go. And she's struggling, and she's ready to take a shelter. And just to escape. Nowadays, Ukraine is trying to escape, and it coincides with the interests of many Western countries that want Russia to bleed and want to weaken Russia. That's why they're trying to help Ukraine, because they have their own interest. That's why we have such a bloody war, and I don't see how to deal with. So the question of Russian imperialism and Russian nationalism is very important. Is a very important motivation, and is a very important reason for this war. But we can discuss. You can write to me a message, and we can continue our talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks for offering that. Let's go on. The next hand that I saw is Krista Katsouras.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is Jed, her husband. We're watching it together. Yeah, I'm following this. I follow this situation very closely, and I find it to be very concerning, just to the entire world. Just the other situations are as well. Especially the most recent attack. In one way, it's okay. You're attacking military infrastructure, so you're trying to avoid civilian casualties. But then at the same time, you're risking.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what the Kremlin's going to do, and I mean, it's really putting the whole world at risk of nuclear war, and it's affecting me. So, I mean, I just feel that we need peace. We need negotiations. We need to somehow resolve this in a peaceful way, because it's really threatening our human civilization at this point. So my question is,
Thank you.
About the UN. Why isn't the UN doing anything?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, I also a proponent of peace negotiation rather than military solution to this conflict. But as you notice, Putin in past days, some experts believe that he believes that he can defeat Ukraine militarily. Why? Because as you see, if you follow, in last week, Russians took 18 settlements in Ukraine and more than 200 square kilometers in the Sumy region. So they are advancing very quickly nowadays. Why? One of the reasons, the lack of manpower in Ukraine. Nowadays, millions of men, basically, 6 million of men didn't update their data for recruitment officers. Why? Because nobody believed in military. Let's say many people don't believe in military defeat of Russia. It's a basic math. It's a calculation how many resources has Russia and the powerful China ally, and other countries, and how many resources have Ukraine and the manpower. In Ukraine nowadays we have 30 million people, and 10.5 of them are pensioners. Can you imagine? So basically, one of the main problems for Ukraine is a lack of manpower, and it's one of the reasons why Putin's really believe that he will solve this problem, let's say, militarily on the battlefield. That's why he's not willing to stop. That's why many people don't believe in peace negotiations nowadays, because Putin wants Ukraine to capitulate. It's very difficult. That's why many people ask Trump, because he's a powerful man, a leader of powerful state, to put more pressure on Putin, but who knows? We
Thank
don't
you,
know.
Professor.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just going to say a lot of people don't have their video screen on, so I can't see a hand if anybody's wanting to ask a question. That's on number 2 and number 3. I don't know if that's true for Paul or Brian, but I just want to point that out. But the next question that I do see on the first screen is Donald Smith. And I think you're on mute.
Okay.
There
Yes.
you-
Okay. Quick question, and I ask this to many of the guests who appear on these Zoom meetings: is please comment on what your colleagues think of you, and do they think you're crazy? Do you get harsh criticism? Do you have support? Do you have allies? Please comment on that. Thank you. Very quick question. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this question. When I started to criticize Ukrainian nationalists, I started to receive threats not only from far right in Ukraine, but I started to be bullied by my colleagues, because many of my colleagues are themselves nationalists. And the head of my research institute went to security service of Ukraine and said that I am a Russian asset, that I'm on Putin's payroll. And I started to experience many problems in my professional life. They wanted to fire me, because many people, I was born in Western Ukraine, where these Ukrainian nationalists on the ground basically localized. So many people there are very nationalistic, and they experience anti-Semitism and, nationalism. And after the war started, emotions are enormous. And many people can't understand. Many people demand that you will be, first of all, patriot, not historian, not specialist, not human being even, not pro-peace, that you will be patriot, that you will support this nationalistic, ethno-nationalistic agenda. And I am against this. I can't imagine that some person will teach me and my son what language we should use between us in the shop or in the cinema. But in Ukraine nowadays, many people are attacked just because they use Russian language. They call them, oh, use enemy language. So why you don't, why you don't demobilize, tens of hundreds of thousands of Russian-speaking soldiers? Why not open borders for Russian-speaking soldiers in Ukraine? Why you want them to die, denying them right in education in Russia, for education in Russian language, and so on and so forth? So I'm against ethno-nationalism, and many of my colleagues don't support that. That's why they engage in bullying campaign. And basically, I'm very vocal about this. I ask them, you are giving, you are giving a weapon in the hands of the far right, because you are encouraging their violence, and they will execute this violence. Because I already received death threats, and I already received rape threats for me and my loved ones, including my child. So it's very difficult situation when people want to be, I call it performative patriotism. But you should be human being, first of all, in all situations. Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very important question.
Okay, John, let me read the names of people who have their hands read. Okay, let me go down this list for you.
Well, why don't you just go? I see one still on this page. I'll do Paul Anawalt.
Yeah,
and then,
he's next. He's next, and then there's 4 others after him.
Paul, please. 45 seconds.
Great. Yeah, I was put on mute and couldn't unmute it. So anyways, thank you very much, Professor Havryshko. Did I pronounce that correctly? Thank you. Very short question. Does Zelensky support the Nazis? Thank you.
Short answer, yes. Under Zelensky, the first parade commemorating Waffen-SS Division Galicia, not in Western Ukraine, where they were formed, but in Kyiv, in the capital, was under Zelensky presidency in 2021. All those far-right units that use openly neo-Nazi, these Nazi symbols and hate symbols are curated by people appointed by Zelensky. He greets him, he celebrates him. Yes, he supports neo-Nazis because I believe one of the reasons he afraid them, so he decided just to make this alliance with them. And the second reason, because of the lack of manpower, they are for them they are instrumental, because he won't keep power and he won't prolong war, and he even want to engage US and European countries directly, militarily in this war. That's why those guys, they can show some results, let's say, for him, and he's very supportive of them. That's why it's a paradox when we have Jewish president and many people use this as an excuse, for this, mantra, there is no Nazis in Ukraine because of the Jewish president. It's a bullshit. Zelensky supports all this far right in Ukraine openly.
Thanks for that response. I see a hand from John Hallam.
Yep.
Would a preconditionless ceasefire, followed by, if necessary, years and even decades of negotiation, be the way forward? And I'd say it is my belief that that is indeed the case.
Thank you so much. So Ukraine needs a ceasefire because Ukraine is exhausted. Exhausted, and Ukraine needs ceasefire very much. But Russia don't need ceasefire. And the main obstacle for the ceasefire is Russia. They don't want ceasefire because they have a leverage on the battlefield, and they want to push nowadays. That's why all these negotiations, two rounds of negotiations were about, as you know, results were about only prisoners of wars and about dead bodies. Nowadays, Russia agreed to send to Ukraine, yesterday, to send to Ukraine 6,000 of Ukraine soldiers' bodies back to Ukraine to bury them with dignity. But Russia don't want a ceasefire. For them, it's not good, let's say, because they are winning on the battlefield.
I think the next hand up is Yuri Smouter. Did I pronounce it right?
Smelter, yeah, perfect. and you can hear me fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, very quick question is, I'm very surprised to hear how critical you are of Russia. So given that, do you think that Ukraine, the Donbass area, is going to be partitioned into 2 or 3 countries? In other words, Donbass and Donetsk will be its own independent country, or it will be part of the Russian Federation. And if that is the case, do you blame the Western-backed Ukraine and the far-right movement with that, or that plus the Russian invasion? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good question. Actually, for me and for many experts, it's obvious that Crimea will never has the less chances to get back to Ukraine for different reasons. For Russia, it's very strategic. It's the entire fleet, it's the entire navy there. For Russia, it's very for military purposes, for political purposes. When Ukraine after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 57% of local population in Crimea were ethnic Russians. So it's a very specific region with, pro-Russian, very pro-Russian identity, very pro-Russian identity. And I really believe that even if we organize some sort of referendum according to, international law, with all these, rules, many people will still say yes for staying in Russia. So it's a very problematic question. But Zelensky can't openly say, we will give up our territories. It's against constitution. It's, it's a criminalized speech. Even I can say this because it's against the law. It's a treason. It's a life imprisonment. But the problem with Donbass is very, very huge. After this revolution of dignity, the new authorities, they lack legitimacy in the Donbas region because Yanukovych was mostly their president. The electoral base of Yanukovych was in Donbas. It was their guy from their circles. They voted for him. They loved him. And now he was, overthrown and he was forced to run, to escape with shame, and so they were so furious. And then what far rights did? They started to talk about the ban of the Russian language instead of, gain legitimacy, instead of, calming those people and say, everything will be okay. We are not nationalists. No, they started to push nationalistic agenda, very ethno-nationalistic agenda. And this region is a very specific region. And that's why all these hostilities started. So not only, Russia, who basically instrumentalized this internal issue, Ukraine internal problem, started to and attacked basically Ukraine. But it wasn't only the fault of Ukraine, basically. Ukraine far rights and Ukraine authorities in Kiev, new authorities, they downplayed the problem of this, mentality, local, identity. So the politics must be different. And I must say that, I really believe that West, collective West, let's say, bear responsibility for this because they pushed this also, they supported all this NGO, US aid, Soros organization, they supported all these NGOs in Ukraine who developed very ethno-nationalistic agenda, which in the case of Ukraine is very, as we see, it's very dangerous because Ukraine is not a unified country. It's a multicultural country, a multi-ethnic country with people who use Russian language and so on and so forth. So basically many factors, but far right is just one of this. But of course, without military interference of Russia, how these local people could obtain tanks and all this weapon. All these they received from, many of these they received from Russia, and then Russian troops participated in the Baltsovo and Ilovaisk, when exactly where this Minsk agreement signed up, because it was a threat for Ukraine, because well-trained Russian soldiers interfered in hostilities in the battle. That's why it was, but many issues here.
Thank you, Professor. Jeffrey, I do see your hand, but let's make sure everybody who has a first question we get to them, and then we'll get to your second question if there's time. Next up, Elizabeth Fatah. Are you on mute? We cannot hear you.
Now?
Good.
Oh, okay, fine. I understood that in the beginning, when right at the beginning of the war, there was there were people who wanted to have a ceasefire, and I understood that it was the West who went there and told Zelensky, no, no, no. So I'd like to know what is the West now, meaning US and Europe, what are they doing right now?
Thank you so much. Yes, exactly. So Ukraine side was ready to agree to some proposals, Russia proposals, but of course they were not very great for Ukraine because there were limitations for Ukraine armed forces, and of course Crimea and special status for Donbas region. But now conditions are worse. And back then, Johnson came to Kyiv and said, let's fight. Of course, because it's not your sons, it's not your colleagues who are dying, on the front line. And nowadays, what we observe from Western countries, first of all, many of them are open about the fact that they are preparing for the war with Russia in Europe. Germany open about this, Baltic states, some even population is removing from these, border territories because they're really afraid of Russian attack. So they are preparing for the war with Russia. But in order to be prepared, they want to win some time. That's why they openly say that they want Ukrainians to keep fighting at least until 2029, because they want to win time for rearmament, for training new soldiers, for recruitment, and so on and so forth. So basically, they are very open about this. And many, even Poland said, no, we will not send any soldiers to Ukraine. So they don't want to send their sons' husbands, they want to fight and bleed Russia by Ukraine lives, by Ukraine hands. And it's very hypocritical, It's very cynical for me. But many of them believe that Russia will be threat. That's why that they want to keep bleed Russia, but with Ukraine hands, with Ukraine lives. And I believe it's very cynical. It's very cynical. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Timothy Havel. Are you with us, Timothy Havel? Can you hear me? Maybe he's taken a break.
Yeah, I had trouble unmuting. I apologize.
There you are.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I have a question regarding, I think I kind of understand Putin. I think I kind of understand Trump, Biden, everybody else. The one I don't understand is Zelensky. He obviously knows he's not going to win militarily in a conventional war with Russia. At one point, I thought he was just trying to abscond with as much aid as he could and then retire somewhere nice. But if he were going to do that, he would have done it by now. What he seems to be trying to do is to get into World War III. And even he doesn't come out on top of that, as he must surely know. Is he a crazed suicide bomber out to kill us all? What is he thinking? Paradox, as you call it. Comments?
Yeah, thank you so much. The problem with Zelensky, he loved power, like many other people, and that's why he didn't step down even after this, disaster in Oval Office in U.S. While many people asked him just to go because it was a disaster. When you have this kind of conversation, let's say, with the most powerful man on the earth, and Ukraine budget, 50% of Ukraine budget is from the sources from Western money. Israel and intel and weapon and everything is from the West is very dangerous. But he really wants to keep his power for different reasons. First of all, I believe he afraid that many people will ask questions about him because he poorly prepared Ukraine for defense. And he was trying to keep calm people, and he didn't organize evacuation even of children and elderly people and vulnerable people from the border territories with Russia. And so basically many questions about corruption in his inner circle. And that's why for him it's very important to keep his power. In this way he will avoid persecution, and in this way he will avoid basically retaliation. But another reason, I believe he really wants to grab US and European countries directly into the conflict. He wants foreign soldiers in Ukraine land, because for Ukraine is already Ukraine has nothing to lose, let's say, in this situation, because so many cities are wiped out from the earth, and I believe for him and many people in Ukraine, the mood is yeah. We should invite those forces. They should interfere directly. So basically, the World War III for Zelensky team is it's the best scenario. I believe it's the best scenario. That's why they are pushing this, because for Ukraine it's nothing. It's not a big difference. Let's say it's a big difference for peaceful citizens of peaceful Berlin, and other cities. That's why, yeah, Zelensky he wants to be in power, and this image that Western media made for him, this leader of democratic world, fighting for freedom and democracy against this, authoritarian, Russian horse from the east, he loved this, he is entertainment guy. He loves this applause, he loves to be greeted, to be celebrated. He's a showman, and we should keep this in mind. So yeah, a lot of problems with his personality, actually. Yeah.
Aren't you a PhD in psychology as well as history? Let's go on to the next question. Karen Carlson.
Oh, thank you so much. I wonder, in 2019, Zelensky was for peace. He promised peace, and then it changed. So I wonder if that was because he was threatened by the Nazis or neo-Nazis. And my second question is, how is the condition in Donbass now?
Thank you so much. So why Zelensky changed his mind? Several factors. First of all, pressure from Biden administration. Biden administration really believed that then they can, win this battle over Ukraine with Russia, and they put pressure on Zelensky not to give up, not to engage in this Minsk agreement. And we know that they sent a lot of weapons to Ukraine, and nobody actually, and the calculation, I believe, was that Ukraine is received the great weapon back then, and Ukraine can push back Russian forces. And we know that those who participated in February 2022, it wasn't enough to occupy even half of Ukraine. It was a very small number. They really believe that it will be key for 3 days, and it will be complete capitulation, and so on and so forth. But Biden administration, and the problem is that Biden administration, they push this NATO question. Our doors are open, so they manipulated this question so much, and Zelensky really believe, or maybe they will help us, and all this speculations regarding NATO, as you see even today. Rutte one day he says no NATO for Ukraine. We don't see it's in near future. Today Rutte said no. Doors are open. So basically, this question is always on the table and is manipulated and instrumentalized by so many actors. But we know that for Russia, it's a red line, yeah, in terms of Ukraine and so on. That's why. So I believe that Zelensky, on the one hand, he believe that interference of Western collective West will be bigger, and that Ukraine, and they probably, maybe they will directly interfere and so on. So this calculation. The second one is connected with this far-right threat. They really started to threat his power. And for him, it was the beginning of his, presidential term. And for him, it was very important to prove that I'm good in that, I can change the system. And he was so inspired. I'm not like these oligarchs. I don't have this, past. I wasn't part of these corrupted schemes. I can do that. I will show you. So his ego, and then when he received threat from this far right, and they blame him. Oh, you are Russian asset. You are Russian puppet. And he was no, I will do that. And because of his ego, he started to use this rhetoric like with Trump, very similar rhetoric during conversation with Putin. And it's a very dangerous rhetoric when you deal with such personality and such toxic masculinity, let's say, that Trump and Putin in bed, because they perceive as a, as a humiliation. We know this personality, this type of man, that they like to be, powerful, and everyone should obey them. So and even people from inner circle from Zelensky, they were open about this very dangerous discussion. So Zelensky, because of lack of his political experience, he was very, in Russian, we call it dersky, meaning he was very, not, let's say, polite, not, so the dynamic of this conversation was very, very intense. And I believe it was one of the reasons. So, of course, Putin, and I must say, Minsk agreement was very tricky agreement, because the problem was, the main reason why Minsk agreement basically stuck was the question of elections. Ukraine government said, how can we organize elections when your soldiers are there? Can you imagine the expression of free will under tanks and your rifles? And Putin said, no, we will not, we will leave only after elections. So basically, you can't solve this problem. It's unsolvable. You just can't, so many questions were from the very beginning. So the conflict of interest was so great. And Zelensky, he really understood that it's not easy to resolve this problem. It's not easy just to say, okay, let's peace and love and everything. No, Putin is very dangerous, and Russia and this, historical relations with Russian imperialism are very difficult. It's not easy to deal with Putin, as now Trump understood already, because he promised 24 hours, and it will be peace. No, Putin is not this kind of person. It's not easy man. And the same was with Zelensky. He was disappointed that it's not easy to deal with Putin, so many reasons, yeah.
Oh, thank you for all that. We have 3 minutes left, and we have 2 more questions. One is one from me, and then we're going to go for that second question from Jeffrey Barkdale. And both of us have to keep it pretty brief because we have had a long webinar. Professor Havryshko has really stuck with us for the full hour and a half. My question is this. I read that there was a Gallup poll in Ukraine last November, which said, just like you said earlier, the people are exhausted and they're willing to have a peace agreement, a negotiated settlement, even with some territorial concessions and even neutrality or a NATO out, on the table. What is your sense 6 months after those? Is that accurate? You think it's still that way?
It's a very interesting question, because I don't believe in polls that are performed in Ukraine, because it's not a free country anymore. Ukraine, we have a martial law, we have a great censorship, and we have many cases when people put something on social media, some comments, some video with criticism of Zelensky, for example. The next day, security service knocking in their doors, and couple hours later, those people are recording video with apologies. Oh, I was wrong, and something like that. So we don't have, Ukraine under martial law during this time is not a free country. That's why those polls that we see in Ukraine, they don't reflect basically a public opinion. I don't believe in those polls, but many of those polls shockingly show that many people are not willing to give up territories. And it's ridiculous, because, I even made a joke that all those people who are asked about, peace and ceasefire and some, peace deal and some conditions, after that should be immediately given a draft paper. Because many people believe that someone else will go fight, lose their limbs, lose their eyes, lose their arms and legs, someone else. Because the resistance to forced mobilization in Ukraine is enormous. You can't even imagine. I plan even write an article about this women's grassroots resistance, because they are, they are organized themselves, women, right in the streets when they see how military men are trying to draft, another man, and they attack those military guys, and just protect these poor men. So resistance is enormous. So on the one hand, we have this, these strange results of polls that are delivered and presented by Ukrainian officials. Nobody wants, a ceasefire. Everyone is believing. Recently, 80% of Ukraine believe in victory, military victory over Russia. And I am so shocked. Who are those people? Are they in the front line? Are there relatives in the front line? Because several of my relatives are in the army and they are fed by this war. Many of them, some of my friends were trying to commit suicide because they can't bear this, death all the time. Some of them deserted from the army, and in Ukraine nowadays we have at least of 100,000 deserters. It's a bigger number than the entire UK army. Many people can't bear this. They don't trust commanders, corruption, this so-called meat waves when commanders send them to, these suicidal missions, many criticize Kursk operation, for example, because they really, doubt that this was, effective operation. And nowadays we see all these numbers, and later we will learn about, those people who died in Kursk region, so many people don't believe in this military defeat. So it's like, double thinking. Many people even afraid openly to talk about, if you say, I don't believe in victory over Russia, many people blame you. You're not true patriot. You are not true patriot, You undermine morale of your people, and it's crazy, So this situation, this entire emotional situation in Ukraine is very, very, very complex, and I believe it's very good case study for many anthropologists, nowadays, for many sociologists, anthropologists, and so on. But many my friends, many my relatives, they want this war to stop. They are ready to sacrifice some territories because they don't see how those territories can be retaken, especially Crimea. Russia will definitely use nuclear weapon to protect Crimea. Russia will never give up Crimea. We understand this very well. Crimea is a sacred space for Russia. How do you, even plan to retake those territories? It's crazy. It's just crazy, it's a wishful thinking, magic thinking. It's like,
Thank you for such a full response. And Jeffrey Barkdahl, I'm going to have to renege on my offer because we're 3 minutes over our limit. I'm not sure about our tech person, but I think and Professor Havryshko actually invited us to contact her with other questions. Is that right? Through your website? So, Jeffrey, you can ask your second question if you'd like to do that tomorrow or in the coming days. But I just think I want to really thank Professor Marta Havryshko for everything you've shared. There has been such passion, such courage, such energy, and caring. I really appreciate it. I'm going to invite everybody to just give me a little energy with your fingers like this. It's not like clapping, but thank you, thank you, thank you. We will keep everybody posted on future webinars. I do encourage you to go to Useful Idiots and look at the interview that she did with Useful Idiots, Katie Halper. Very good. And this one will be recorded if you think you'd like to see it again or share it with other people. And I'm going to say, wish everyone a good night. And again, thank you, Professor Havryshko.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for this wonderful evening. And for all who participated in this discussion. Thank you so much. And let's pray for peace and stand for peace. It's so important. Yeah.